All right, now that we've got a good amount of you joining us, we'll go ahead and get started at least with some of the administrative stuff. So first off, just a quick reminder, if you have questions during today's session, you'll see a question tab. You can go ahead and submit those, and Brock and myself will get those. We'll address those all at the end of the presentation. So today I'm going to start with a brief introduction of Munvo and then quickly hand it over to today's guest presenter, who's Brock Sutton. He's joining us today from the Capital Group. And then once Brock finishes, I'll return, I'll help with the questions, help with the wrap up. And of course, we're going to try to address all the questions that come up during the webinar today. However, if you want to have a one-on-one discussion with us, if you're watching this on replay, I know several of you contacted us saying, couldn't make the time, but you're definitely interested. If you're watching this on replay, just reach out, just reply to us. We'll arrange a one-on-one discussion and get that arranged. So with that in mind, let's get started. So for those of you who don't know us already, it's a real pleasure to meet you, and we're really glad you took the time today to join us. We're Munvo, and our mission is to help you maximize your MarTech investment. So how do we do that? We partner with industry-leading MarTech providers, from Adobe and SaaS to Salesforce, Unica, Pega, ActionIQ, and Redpoint. We also have our own in-house development lab where we identify gaps in existing MarTech stacks and create complementary products and some of our own unique solutions. We're definitely not new to this game. We've been around since 2005 when we started as Client Spectrum. And since then, we've grown to having over 100 consultants and developers with enterprise customers spanning North America and EMEA. And so, really whether Munvo offers services from implementation to marketing transformation to data and analytics services, all the way to marketing operations. So whether you're at the very start of your MarTech journey and you really need help road mapping and developing a plan to figure out how to get where you're going, or you simply need to augment your team capabilities, or you need help with a complex integration, we can absolutely help with all those things. We have deep experience at the enterprise level for solution delivery. I'm really thrilled to have and announce our guest speaker to you today, Brock Sutton. I think he's got a really engaging presentation and a really real-life presentation that everyone should be able to resonate with. He's the head of emerging client capabilities at Capital Group, and he's going to talk to you about how he led his team to leverage MarTech and drive increased relevance in communications, ultimately leading to a pretty significant revenue boost. So, Brock, if you're ready, stage is yours. You can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. I'm excited to be here today and hopefully share some insights that you guys can take away and apply to your business. So before we get into that, a little bit of a high level kind of background on Capital Group, just to make sure that folks kind of understand, where we play in the space. So we really are a pure play asset manager. So focused on public markets, focused on equities and fixed income, and really packaging those into all different types of products and solutions for our end clients. And so if you think about our business model, it basically spans all the way from direct investing on one end. So this is, you go into your TD Ameritrade, Schwab account, et cetera, and buying Capital Group ETFs, all the way up market to the institutional clients. So these are going to be your kind of mega plans, your endowments, things like that, and managing money for those clients as well. But our sweet spot and where this kind of presentation is targeted is really in the U.S. intermediary market. So that's going to be kind of U.S. Financial advisors is mainly kind of where this presentation will focus on. And really what drove the need for integration was, like a lot of financial institutions, we are almost, 100 years old. And because of that, obviously, we're not digital natives. So our functions, our go-to-market functions, Salesforce, marketing, digital service, those all kind of came about independently of one another. And they didn't kind of grow from one kind of place when, digital and data was kind of the core competency across all of those. So when we took a step back and we looked at our client experience, just doing the analysis and said, hey, what happens to a client in a given week or a given month? Really what we saw was a disconnect between the different channels. So what was happening in a sales channel versus what was happening on our website or through email or through media. Was very different from each other and different yet from what was happening with that client on the servicing side. So we said, hey, there's got to be a way to solve this client experience problem. We actually went out and we looked at best in breed companies to say, hey, how have others solved this? And we didn't actually just stick to financial services. We looked to the big guys. We looked to big tech, really to say, hey, how have they solved this problem? How are some of the consumer industries solved this problem? And then how can we take their frameworks and apply them to our business and really do so at scale? So that was kind of what kicked off this project. So if you think about this, really the objective is kind of to deliver the right message to the right client at the right time through the right channel, which is easier said than done. And then the other focus was really to be responsive to client behaviors. So one of the things that we had become really good at was proactive campaigns. So we were good at saying, hey, today is September 19th, 2023. We want to run a campaign on XYZ, and then press go. But what we weren't good at doing is understanding client behaviors, understanding those changes in behaviors, and then responding to them in a meaningful way. So that's something else we wanted to focus on. And then the last piece was really the ability to respond in a way that wasn't just one channel specific. So how do we make sure what our sales force is talking about is the same thing from what our service call center is talking about to the same thing that our digital channels are offering? So that was kind of the overall objective and mission. And then if you think about the deliverables or what you really need to be able to do that, there's really kind of two core competencies. So one is a comprehensive go-to-market data set. And this is what is all the data that you need to kind of orchestrate all of your client experiences. So that was really one foundational piece that we were building within this project. The other one was an ability to easily integrate distribution channels and to do so at scale. So we had done this in the past where we had tied client interactions together through multiple channels. But one of the problems is we had very, very kind of specific and tailored use cases. So when we tried to take a step back and scale those out, it didn't necessarily work for us. So it's something where we needed to start with scale and then become more specific and tailored over time. And then what we did was we turned on business priority use cases, one, to test and just make sure that, hey, is this working or not? And then two, really to kind of, lead the business and say, hey, this is something you need to continually invest in. And it's a project continually that we should be focusing on to move forward. So those are kind of the fundamental deliverables that we'll get into. And then, the big question is like, what is the actual business value of this? One is around just the automation of client engagements. How do you do less? How do you do more with less? Another one, and we'll get into this very specifically, is the measurement of client outcomes and optimization. How do you know what is working and isn't working in market, and how are you getting better over time? And then the last one was really how do you align this with your business model? And so for us at Capital Group, at an asset management company, we really tried to take the life cycle like approach. And so what that means is someone who has no business with us, who's never done business with us before, they're going to have really different needs than us, someone who has 25% market share with us. So the channels we use, the messages that we send, and how we actually connect with that client are going to be very different. So we wanted to change our go-to-market approach to really represent kind of our business model and focus on the client life cycle. So that's a high-level kind of overview of this effort and what we're going to talk about today. The next slide here is focused on kind of where we were and where we're trying to go. So on the left here, if you look at this is really looking at historically how we had went to market. So we said, hey, for calendar year 24, what is our business plan? And then came up with our business plan. And then each team, whether it be marketing, sales, or service, or different teams within those, said, all right, how are we going to help achieve that business objective? And then they would design their different types of experiences, et cetera, and they would actually push those into market. And so you can see here on the left, from a client's perspective, you maybe have 6 different things going on with that individual at any given time. So really not the best experience and not kind of optimal from what you get from kind of all of your other companies that you interact with. And so what we wanted to move towards was on the right here, where it's really we're going to market as a unified company, as a unified capital group. And we're saying what we think is most important, what the client thinks most important to them. And so really the value here is to be able to focus on one message at a time, Two, be able to focus that message through all of our channels, not just one kind of function specific channel. And then the last one, and I think the most important one, is the ability to test and optimize. So if you look over on the left, if you have 6 things going on with your client at any given time, it's really hard to tell what matters in market. You could have 6 different tests occurring, and they could be in 6 test, control, and holdout groups. But if you go with that kind of unified voice and perspective, you have full transparency of what's happening with that client at any given time. And you're better able to understand, what is working in market, what isn't working, and then what kind of tests do we want to run in the future. So we'll go into that in more detail here in a little bit, but this is kind of high level, the transition that we're really trying to make. So this is a little bit of inside baseball and kind of in the back end of, hey, okay, I understand that from a conceptual perspective, but kind of what does that mean or how does that work? So this is a little technical, but essentially, if you start on the far left, this is kind of your data warehouse. So this is where all of your data is stored. And this slide here is historically how we had went to market, kind of what our problem was. And then what we had done is our data science and our I&A partners had built out, many different types of models or predictive models to tell us what the most important thing was with that client, which all on their own is great, but not something that you want to optimize around independent of one another. And so within those models, what we were then doing is taking that model that said, hey, we think that X is the most important thing. And then we were pushing it directly to one activation channel. So we were pushing it to email. We were pushing it to our website. We were pushing it to a Salesforce app, et cetera. And so what you get downstream of that is 2 things. One, from a Salesforce perspective, when they're going across all the places that they look for information, they're seeing multiple different types of information that maybe are contradictory to each other. So not an ideal Salesforce perspective. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the client. And so from a client's perspective, what the Salesforce is talking to them about versus what is happening within your digital channels, those, again, are not necessarily connected. So really kind of an issue from the client experience and from your Salesforce experience perspective. So where we wanted to transition was kind of right here in the middle. So if you think about the foundational data, all of those pieces are the same. If you think about those targeting models, again, those targeting models aren't bad. All of those are the same in this instance. Really what we're doing is kind of 2 different things. The first one is we're aggregating those different models. So how are we structuring those models in a similar way so that we're able to look across these models and we're able to determine, hey, from a business perspective, which data point do we want to prioritize? So that's kind of the first component. The second component, once we decide within the CDP which data point we want to prioritize, we're activating on multiple channels. So how are we taking that one point of data and how are we sending that to our Salesforce and to our website? So that we can deliver that kind of ideal client experience. So again, from a high level perspective, it's fairly simple. It's about aggregating your data and making decisions about what's important and what isn't. But when you actually have to go and do the work of building out, it's a much more challenging than it actually looks. So that's kind of from the back end perspective. We got a high level overview of what we were trying to do. You kind of have an understanding now from the back end of really what were the technical components and boulders that we actually had to build out to actually enable this. The next thing is around, okay, well, what does that experience actually look like? What are kind of the use cases? And this is where I would encourage folks. There's a lot of effort that needs to be put into alignment of kind of cross-functional leadership. So really getting your marketing leaders aligned with your sales leaders, aligned with your service leaders to help define what that client experience is. Ultimately, the data is going to help lead you to where you want to go and really show you what works and doesn't work. But you have to have a starting point. And the best starting point is to get those leaders together and have them kind of hash out what they think that client experience should look like today. So this was kind of our version of that. And again, we're really focused on the scalability component here. So we don't want to get too specific too fast so that we're not able to create kind of a scalable framework to enable this client experience. So if you look on the far left here, you've got the digital component. So this is really focused on things like identity resolution. So how do you take an unknown and convert them to a known? You've got a component here around relevant digital response. So what are the 10 most valuable things that a client can do on our website digitally, and how do you respond to those in a meaningful way? We're a very Salesforce driven organization, and we have a very, very strong Salesforce. So from a meeting perspective, there's a lot there. So one around, how are we getting meetings with the right client at the right time? The other is once that meeting has been scheduled, what is happening actually before that meeting? What is that experience like? And then after they have that meeting, what happens after that meeting? And then the same thing for event. At the top here, you've got this concept around service. So on one end, you've got onboarding. So for a client that uses your product for the first time or logs into your website for the first time, what does that experience look like? On the other end of the spectrum, you've got client retention. So, someone has stopped meeting with our sales force or stopped digitally engaging, or even more importantly, they start to redeem our funds. What does that experience look like from a client perspective? Then there's a piece around the opportunity. So think of this as in those opportunities that are logged within your CRM by your Salesforce. Once those opportunities are logged, how are you optimizing the win rate? How are you increasing the percentage of those opportunities that are won? And then how are you accelerating the timeline in which those are won? And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got BAU. So this is really focused on kind of your traditional campaigns that obviously don't necessarily go anywhere. You want to have those traditional campaigns where you say, hey, today's September 19th, 2023, and we want to say XYZ in the market, press go. Those are still a big component of your go-to-market. But really what we were trying to do is we were trying to balance it out. So instead of it being, maybe 90-10, we were trying to say, how do we have more of a 50-50 balance from proactive campaigns and reactive campaigns that are responding to client behavior? So really at a high level, this is kind of an exercise that you should take with leadership, really to kind of outline, what does that initial map of client experience look like? So, and this is the part where I really enjoy is the testing component of it. So like I talked about before, historically, we maybe had 6 things happening with a client, maybe 6 different experiments going on, not really sure what's adding value and what isn't. But when we go to market from that kind of centralized perspective, we're really able to get a transparent view of what's working, what isn't, and then how can we improve in the future. So what we did is we took a very structured approach here to the test, control, and holdout. And what we really focused on was within each one of those experiences outlined on the previous slide, what was the outcome that we were trying to optimize for? So for example, on schedule a meeting, it's really clear. Did we get a meeting within the next 4 weeks or not? Yes or no, right? We're focused all of our channels on one outcome so we can measure ourselves against one KPI. For an opportunity, once that's logged for the opportunity management campaign, did we win that opportunity? Yes or no? If so, what was the time? How long did it take for us to win that? So again, a real way for us to measure ourselves and say, what was the one binary outcome we're trying to achieve? And then did we achieve it or not? And so if you set up a framework like this, you're able to get a better understanding of what is making that difference or what matters in the market. So if you look between that test and that control group, both of those get your in-market treatment, whatever that is, digital, sales, both, et cetera. But the difference between those is the test group has a data attribute, so one of those models that your analytics team has identified, whereas the control group doesn't. So really what you're testing here is what is the value of that model? Is it predictive or not? Does that model matter? And then if you look between the test and the holdout group, the difference there is both of those groups have that data point, that attribute, that model. But what you're really testing is what is the value of the treatment. So if we did nothing, what happens versus if we put something in market, what happens? And again, you're really focused on that binary outcome. Did we achieve that meeting or not? Yes or no? And then how do we optimize tests in the future to actually focus on that? And so when you think about building out your KPIs, you want to have 2 kind of frameworks in place. The first one is your leading indicator, and the second is your lagging. So your leading indicator are going to be things that you can clearly control, like meetings, for us, opportunity wins, things of that nature. Did they attend this event? Did they authenticate on this website? And on the other end of the spectrum are going to be longer term kind of customer lifetime value metrics. So what was the incremental revenue over the next 3 to 6 months within this campaign? Did we stem any redemptions over the next 3 to 6 months? So by taking that view, you're going to have a better sense of what is adding value in the market and what isn't. So this is a high level kind of framework, right, that we leverage for all of those use cases that were outlined previously. But the next slide that I want to take you into is really the results of kind of this effort. So we started this, I think, I don't know, time runs away from me sometimes, but I think it was like 2020 or so. And we worked on this project for about 2 years before kind of handing it over fully to the business. But in those 2 years, we did learn a lot about kind of what works, what doesn't, et cetera. And so I know there's a lot of data on here, but I think there's a few things that you should take away. The first one is being responsive to client behaviors matter. So timing is important. So when you see a behavior that you think matters with your client, or they do something that's important, make sure you take that opportunity to connect with them and to follow up. The second one is the ability to combine digital and sales touch points also matters. So when we would respond to something just from our sales force, or we would respond to something just through our digital channels, we did not get the same kind of delta that we did when we integrated across all of these channels. And these two things had impacts in basically 3 different areas here laid out. So the first one and the most important one is sales growth. So over the next 3 to 6 months within this population, we were able to see meaningful sales growth, close to $1 billion here within our kind of small little pilot. So it was real kind of value coming through the door, which ultimately is kind of what matters within all of this. That's really your lagging indicator. And then your leading indicators here are really focused on higher Salesforce engagement. So we're able to get more meetings with these folks and more frequent meetings, and then higher levels of consistent digital engagement. So these folks can consistently digitally engage with us much higher than their control and holdout populations. So again, overall, this gave our leadership enough confidence to say, hey, this is something we want to invest in. This is something we want to continue down. And this is something we actually have scaled to the rest of our organization, and they're implementing. So I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the partnership that Munvo has provided Capital Group, and kind of the 3 areas that I would just like to highlight and call out and say, hey, thank you for them for kind of leaning in and help us solve these very complex problems. The first one is around CDP implementation. So when you build out that CDP, which remember was kind of that box within client engagement decisions, you have to connect your data sources. You have to also connect your activation platforms. So they really help with that effort of actually enabling the CDP. The other one is data architecture and design. So when you're thinking about, hey, how do we structure our data to make it scalable? That's a very complex question. So they really leaned in and help us think through kind of how do we want to structure this data in a way that's going to build a foundation that we're going to be able to build on top of and enable many more use cases in the future. And the last one is really around those use cases on that slide that I showed. So they helped out in building and deploying journeys. So actually going through the process within the CDP, building those data attributes, helping build those experiences, and actually deliver that kind of in-market value for clients. So I know we're coming up here to time. And so just in summary, a few things to kind of leave you folks with is the first one is, be really clear about defining your outcomes. Make it a binary outcome, 1 or 0, so you're able to measure yourself and understand what works and what doesn't. That's kind of the first component here. The second one was work across those functional teams to define that client experience. You have to have alignment within your organization within all different functions because everyone is an owner of client experience at the end of the day. And then the last one was really lean into the technology, to enable your use cases. So focus on using the technology kind of fit for purpose, and then you enable those use cases so that you can measure the value to the business and kind of gain momentum as you move forward. So overall, I just want to say, thanks for having me today, and I'll kick it back over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Brock. That was great. And yeah, I think personally, it's really impressive to see the impact that this initiative had on your business. So we've got a couple of great questions that came in during the webinar. So if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started and go through several of them. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one I'll say is, what was the impetus for this project kicking off? Was there a specific pain point where you guys, initially crystallized the idea?
Yeah, I mean, it was really around something that our analytics team had kind of pointed out. So we had done some kind of cross-functional analysis and research, really to say, okay, what does a typical kind of client experience at Capital Group look like? So if we go back and we look at kind of our different segments, what is their month? What does their week look like? What kind of messages are they receiving in the market? What are the sales force saying to them? What are the notes that the sales force wrote down about what topics they're discussing? Any service calls that had come in, what had they talked about on those service calls? And what we really saw was kind of a disjointed effort where the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand when we would go to market and when we would talk to these clients. So kind of a real aha moment for the organization to say, hey, I think we can do a better job of tying these together. And then the other kind of interesting component of this was like looking through companies that just do this, very, very well. And so we initially just looked just within financial services and we're like, who does this, specifically well, where they're kind of offline and they're online are fully integrated and connected. And we saw some good companies, but if you really look at the ones that kind of do this exceptionally well and are really transformational, I would say it's probably the bigger tech companies. So we really tried to take some of their frameworks, which again, all the time aren't necessarily B2B. But we tried to take their frameworks and say, hey, how do these apply to our business? And that was kind of where we came up with kind of what I showcased today.
Great. So this one just came in, and I'll read the kind of a comment plus a question here. So first off, thank you. These are all the kind of problems that we're facing right now. And then the question is, what obstacles did you face integrating your data architecture into your marketing technology? How did you get buy-in from an organization to invest the time and dollars to drive this forward?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the first thing I'll say on the data side, because it is complex, and I think specifically for Capital Group, we have probably a much more mature data analytics function than we have a go-to-market function, which means that there's just a lot more data in our ecosystem than we can actually act upon. So one of the biggest challenges that we had was everyone raising their hand and saying, hey, my data point is the most important. So I would say if you go in with all data initially, it's going to be too complex and you're never going to achieve scale. So I would focus on the amount of data, the minimal amount of data that you think you can orchestrate a kind of life cycle like experience. And so what we really leaned on was the blueprint from leadership to say, hey, what are we trying to enable? What do we think in market looks like? And then go from there backwards to say, all right, what data do we actually need to enable that? So that was kind of the first one, is start simple with your use cases, start simple with your data, because it gets complex really, really quickly. The second one on the investment component, I would say initially we did this, very, bubblegum and duct tape, meaning like it wasn't in a CDP. It wasn't, fully integrated at scale. Like we proved out the concept by really taking some talented folks, putting them together and just making it run the way we thought it should. And then we put that in market. And once we got results back that were saying, hey, I think that there's something here, leadership started to take notice. So we got the green light for kind of that initial smaller pilot. Leadership took notice on some of the results that we were creating. We took that back to them and said, hey, to do this right, this is what we need, and this is how we need to do it. And so then had that kind of conversation around, funding and headcount and things of that nature. So I would say, start small, prove out the concept. And then once you get some kind of momentum, really lean into that momentum and be able to communicate your story across the organization so that people kind of understand, what is the value to them at the end of the day once you're able to build something like this.
That makes sense, and kind of along those same the same tone as the last question. Next one is, and we have two more, so we'll go through these. I think we have time, and then we'll wrap up a little bit with some follow up on the next two slides. But before that, can you touch a bit upon the revenue lift? I think that's following up on that whole investment part here. Talk a little bit about what revenue lift you saw and maybe how the organization saw the success of it.
Yep. So I think the first thing is make sure you design your test, control, and holdout populations appropriately. And so what I mean by that is you really need to have the right balance of loyalists, people for us, that's maybe 25% market share, to people that don't use Capital Group at all. So make sure that their historical kind of business with the organization is accounted for within all of that. So that's kind of the first component of revenue lift. And then really what we saw was those folks, they consistently sold with us at a little bit of a marginal higher rate, but they also redeem with us much less. So if we were able to consistently engage with them with our sales force and consistently engage with them digitally, so if they were kind of had part of their mind share was focused on Capital Group, what we saw was an incremental sales increase, but also the redemption on that end of the spectrum really stopped. And so that's where we said, hey, building these relationships with clients is worth it. It's worth it on the acquisition side. So for someone that, has never done business with us before, obviously there's a revenue lift there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you're able to maintain that relationship with the client, what you're able to do is that they're more likely to trust you and to continue to invest with you. So those were kind of some of the revenue lifts that we saw. And we did this actually across the wealth and retirement business. So we saw very similar revenue lifts on both sides of the business. So it wasn't just isolated to just wealth management or just institutional retirement. We actually did see this on both sides of the business.
Strong. Nice. Appreciate that one. So we've got another here. Can you achieve scaling during the initial stages of CDP implementation, or is it best suited for mature CDP using companies?
So I think you can achieve scale. I just think you need to start with simpler use cases. So we had originally, when we had tried these things in the past, a group would come to us and they would say, hey, we designed this customer journey and it has, 7 touch points, 4 decision splits, and it's a segment of, 1,000 or something like very small like that. And then what our IT department had done is they had built something very specific for that use case. So then when we tried to go backwards and say, well, how do you do this across the org? It wasn't built for that. So I think to start kind of very simply, I would say, like, what is the highest kind of value thing? And the thing also that your organization is going to get excited about. So for us, like a big one is our sales force, and it's getting meetings with our sales force, the right people at the right time. We knew if we could achieve that, that would be a big win within the organization. And it's a pretty broad task, right? You can achieve that in kind of multiple ways. So I would say start with kind of that macro kind of theme that you really feel like is going to propel the organization forward. And then just understand that you're not going to build the perfect experience right away. So 20% of probably the value in that experience or 20% of the experience probably creates 80% of the value. So kind of take that message and make sure that you communicate that to the organization. It's not going to be perfect, but directionally, we're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then over time, you can get more specific and tailored. But I think starting with a simpler use case is actually really helpful within this instance, and just maybe even one use case, specifically when you know what your longer term vision is. So you kind of have to attack it from both ends to say, like, what do we think we want to be when we grow up? And then what is our first step to how we get there?
Great. Let's squeeze one more in here because we have a little time. I think it's a good one. If you did it all over again, anything you would change?
Yes, that's a great question. There's so many things I would change. I would change so much. I honestly think the data architecture would be the one component that, if hindsight's 2020, but if we knew at the beginning what we knew today, I think it would have saved us a lot of technical debt and friction in kind of solving those problems real time. So, and I think that's just a little bit of it is going to be kind of trial and error within the organization. And so I would say that would be the one component, is really think through your data and how should your data be structured. And I think defining the use cases is kind of the first component. Then define what data you need to enable those use cases, and then get your best IT architecture, data architecture folks on the problem to say, really communicate with them, take the time to invest to say, like, this is exactly how we see this in the future. what does the data need to look like to actually get us there? That would be kind of the one thing that if I could go back in time and shake myself, I would probably spend a bit more time on that up front, because it would have saved me some headaches down the road.
Thanks a lot, Brock. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for fielding all those questions on the fly. I think, piqued a lot of people's attention here. And yeah, if you're one of those, or if you're watching this later and it's recorded and you're thinking, so how do I get started? How does Munvo come into play? What do I do? Basically, reach out to us. We'll put together a free, no obligation consultation. We need to understand your goals. Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do, and what are you trying to achieve? And then we'll help you put together a plan, see where you are now, see how long it's going to take, and see how we can help and how your internal resources can be leveraged. And the real goal is delivering immediate ROI, of course, developing clear and actionable use cases to get you that return on investment as quick as possible, so you can fund the investment that you've put together. So I realize, if you might be on here now, you might have a question that you think of later. You might be watching this on demand. If you have a question that pops up, get in touch with us. You can reach us directly. Got an email address there. Reach us on LinkedIn, scan the QR code, go to our contact form. Should be easy to find us. We'd be happy to put together a separate session for you, or happy to dive in initially to that discovery call if you need. I'd like to thank again Brock for joining us. I always think it's great to hear in the voice of one of our clients that we've partnered with. And he did a really great job of taking us through that whole project. Love it. I've been Alex Ewer. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Take care.